For the week of November 2nd, this is what's coming up on CT Examiner Weekly.
I'm Editor-in-Chief Greg Stroud with all the details and results from our rolling coverage of the recent local elections.
I'm reporter Robert Starachi with news from New Britain, with what the voters ultimately decided in the town's race for a new mayor.
I'm Nick Sambides, and I'll be discussing the shoreline towns of Stratford and Milford, and then I'll go inland with news from Hamden's election.
And from Stamford, I'm reporter Eric Obernower with all the wins and losses from the southwest of the state.
And I'm Amy Wu with results from Groton and Mystic, plus a win for the new Forward Party in Stonington.
All that and more in this week's edition of CT Examiner Weekly, including reporter Ali Lamaster, who also joins us around the table. I'm your host, Brian Scott-Smith. Welcome to you all. Now, it's been quite the last few weeks as voting in the state started with early voting and culminated on November 4th with in-person voting in the 2025 local elections. CT Examiner has been reporting for months in the lead up to Election Day, and on November 4th had comprehensive rolling coverage from daybreak to when polling closed. And here to talk to us about that is Editor-in-Chief Greg Stroud. Greg, a lot of logistics involved in the coverage, which was across the state.
It's it's not rocket science. It's old school on the ground reporting, 6 a.m. to midnight, actually after midnight. So we have 10 reporters. 3 of them were interns from the Yukon and Quinnipiac journalism programs, and they were driving town to town, talking to the candidates and voters.
Why was it so important to have this amount of coverage? I mean, this was a big amount of coverage.
It's a celebration of democracy. I think there's this ongoing unease about the legitimacy of elections. And so part of it is to give people confidence in the elections.
And also, I think it's a chance to go out and just connect with the community. It was it was a thrill to get out there at like 7 a.m. and at the polls and talk with different folks. You know, for example, in my community, Brantford, and pretty exciting to hear what they think.
I think part of it is when something goes wrong, we have a reporter there. Or we've had a reporter there recently, and they have someone to call. So maybe there'll be a town where the tabulators break, or there'll be long lines. And we've had reporters there on the ground that can get answers, give people confidence. But also, frankly, this election, it went really smoothly. And some of that might have to do with so much early voting.
Eric, any thoughts as well on this?
Well, one thing that was interesting to me was how in Stamford, I was told that turnout was even higher this year than it was during the presidential election last year. There are some issues that they were passionate about, but that did not turn out to be the case.
I think part of that might have to do, one thing that we saw in our early numbers, we were tabulating all the early voting, the early absentee voting, and we saw that, interestingly, Stamford really was kind of trailing compared to how big of a city it was. There wasn't that much early voting. I don't know if that was a question of enthusiasm or what, but maybe it gave that last-minute boost that you saw there at the polls.
And Robert, I just want to get a quick snapshot from you. I don't want you to talk about your main story because we're going to get to that in a few minutes. But what were some of the thoughts and feelings, for you as you were sort of like doing the reporting on the day?
Yeah, like Greg said, it's democracy in action. I got to go to my hometown of Southbury and speak to people there, and it was very informative. It was wonderful to see a lot of people, at least in my town, go to the polls. People of both parties were just happy to be there, happy to take part of the process. And it was really nice to watch. It was really nice to see.
I want to ask the question of all of you as well. There was the new tabulation machines this year. A couple of little, hiccups, but that's bound to happen with technology. Greg, just give us a sense, or maybe the reporters give us a sense of, what sort of reaction were you getting from people? Because, for some people, this was new for them.
My general sense was people liked it. There's a lot of older voters. Sometimes they have problems filling in the circles. And the tabulator will tell them immediately that they need to go back and fix something. But we did see on the back end slowness. And so what it meant is we have a lot of towns. We still have some towns that haven't reported their numbers. They came in slowly in a lot of towns. There was a little bit of confusion about that.
Nick, you wanted to add something?
I've done some preliminary looking into that. And one of the things about the new machines is that they print out, the older machines printed out on a ticker tape, and the new machines print out on an 8.5 by 11 sheet. And there were adjustment issues to that for a lot of poll workers. It's just literally the first time they went through with a new machine, and I think it slowed things down a lot.
Yeah, I understand as well from speaking to the Office of the Secretary of the State that the actual tabulation process, as you say, the machine was new, but the actual form as well, which Nick's just alluded to, had smaller circles on it, and also the pens had to be different, and it wasn't the felt pen this time. You had to use like a different type of pen. Amy?
Yeah, I think what I saw in Groton at the polling sites was that it took longer this year. In fact, the results came in around 4 a.m. in the morning because they were counting the write-in candidates as well, and that sort of delayed some things. Also, otherwise, didn't hear too much about the other forms of tabulation, but that's what kept them.
I think one thing that we're seeing is it's the heyday again, or new heyday of machine politics. I think what we're seeing is the growing importance of early voting, absentee voting. And for that to happen, that takes an apparatus, that takes voter lists, that takes a local party that's really organized. And so I think in many ways we're really seeing the local power of the parties exerting itself in a way that's pretty effective, like in, say, the town of Stamford or the town of Groton, where these parties really are running things. But one of the interesting things to come is what will happen when younger voters play a bigger and bigger role, because those younger voters are not attached to parties like their parents.
We're going to pick up on that towards the end of the podcast because I want to raise that as well. But Ali has got a point. Ali.
I was going to say when I was talking to members of the party when they were members of local parties when they were out at the polls, was that they believed that their campaigns had to start a lot quicker because early voting starts in about mid-October. And for some parties, they don't have candidates at that time. So I think that it's the idea of maybe regrouping and thinking about local politics in a different way as well.
As we said, still lots to talk about. And one of the races that drew much attention was in New Britain, where there was a race for mayor, as the current mayor, Republican Erin Stewart, who'd been in office for 12 years, didn't run for re-election as she is making a run for governor. And reporter Robert Starachi had been following this story for us. And Robert, tell us what happened.
So in the end, Brian, the registered Democrats in New Britain came home. Erin Stewart was mayor for 12 years. She was not on the ballot this time, and registered Democrats are 3-1 in New Britain. And there were two reasons. One, they came home. And two, what I was hearing doing my reporting was this was a vote against, in a large part, because I heard this from a lot of people, against what's going on at the federal level, against what's going on with the Trump administration, whether it's the lockout, whether it's the tariffs. A lot of people that I spoke to said this was a protest vote, is what one person told me, and they wanted to vote Democratic. Not necessarily. There were some people who voted locally, but a lot of people said they voted for the national reasons, just for a protest vote.
See, that's interesting because I'm just going to jump in here, Robert. That is interesting because of course, since the election, the Democrats have come out and they said, "Oh, we found our voice," and and I think a lot of people have actually sort of like said the same thing that you've just said. Is actually no, they're riding on the tailcoats of the fact that a lot of people are very unhappy with what's happening with the current administration. Greg.
So, I mean, one of the things and one of the big stories in 2024 was the urban vote and the Latino and Black vote. And in some places we've seen a flip, I know, in other states. One of the sort of interesting points we saw in terms of turnout this year is Hartford and Bridgeport actually had turnout of about 5%. So we're talking in a state where the state overall has a turnout that's averaging just a little bit over 35%. Bridgeport and Hartford, they didn't have top name races, as things like school board, but 5%. And so will that vote come out on the national level next year? That will be one of the big stories.
The other thing with New Britain as well, if I recall from other reporting from CT Examiner, there was sort of the two candidates there in New Britain had very different visions, I believe, didn't they, Robert, for New Britain?
Yes, the big issue, and interesting, Greg mentioned Hispanics, Puerto Ricans, and Black people, because Bobby Sanchez became the first Puerto Rican mayor of this city, which has a very, very large Puerto Rican population. But yes, Bobby ran on as the candidate. He's a state representative, and he ran as someone who can bring in money to the city, is what he did as a state representative. He ran on the issue of affordability. He ran on the issue of housing. He ran on the issue of education. And I think those were, and especially affordability. And in New Britain, which a lot of people are affected by the federal shutdown related to SNAP benefits and the such, I think that might have played a difference.
Amy.
He delivered, am I correct, part of his speech in Spanish as well? And I'm just curious, like, will the bilingual outreach be a focus of his administration too?
That's what he's told me, that he's going to use his Spanish heritage where he can. He mentioned that he was upset that his parents were not alive to see the first Puerto Rican mayor of New Britain be elected, and so he's trying to reach out to a large segment of the population that the Democrats claim was not part of the fabric, politically speaking, in the past. That's what they claim.
I'm going to give Greg the final comment on this.
So I think one of the, as much as New Britain in some ways has been a success story in terms of the revitalization of the downtown, one of the stories I got was Bobby Sanchez saying, what about the neighborhoods? And certainly some of those neighborhoods would be neighborhoods with large Latino populations that want that representation and maybe want the services and the same money going into their neighborhoods.
Correct. And some of the argument was from the Democrats was that Mayor Aaron Stewart was focusing too much on downtown revitalization and maybe development that was a little pricey. And the Democrats, specifically Bobby Sanchez, was saying, what about the neighborhoods? What about the people that don't live in the downtown? What about fixing up and revitalizing those areas? So that was a huge part of his campaign.
Robert, thank you. We're going to have to leave that because we need to move on to the next story, but it'll be interesting to see exactly how this pans out under his administration. Now, Nick Zambides joins us, and he covered Hampden and Milford as well as Stratford. Nick joins us remotely today. Nick, give us a sense of how things went in the shoreline.
It was a really interesting election in the sense that Stratford, with Stratford's mayor, David Chess, who just got elected, a Democrat with no prior experience at politics at all. And Mayor Laura Hoydick had entered a part of her career where she'd been elected several times before. She could have coasted, and maybe she kind of did, because he came into it. He's a medical entrepreneur and has a lot of money apparently, because he raised $120,000. And she raised something on the order of $36,000. So I don't know that she expected him to turn out as well as he did, or to do as well as he did. But the one key you always see in politics is door to door. When politicians get out and they knock on doors, if they do it a lot and they're good at it, anything can happen.
Greg.
One thing I saw is I remember when Chess contacted us and he wanted to write a letter to the editor, and he wrote several with us. We thought, this guy's an oddball. He doesn't stand a chance. And I have to say, Stratford has one of the great stories in this election. It's not a small town. It's a big town with Sikorsky headquartered there, and flipping that's a little bit of a shockwave, I think, for Republicans. Hoydick was not just an outlier. She was part of the Republican establishment.
And she had a very good brand, so to speak. She was like everybody's favorite mom, but really smart. You couldn't get much by her. And Chess, a lot of people said that in his approach, he was very pie in the sky. Hey, we can sell this town as a great place. When as a locale to visit, Stratford's always fallen between two stools. It's heavy in manufacturing, but it's got great seashore assets, and it really hasn't done a great job of developing those.
Talk to us, Nick, as well about Hampden and Milford. You also covered both of those as well.
Hampden was a race that it really seemed there was a lot at stake, because both candidates raised about $150,000, which is a huge amount for that kind of a race. Normally it's about $70,000. The prior record setter was Anthony Gintasio. He raised $120,000 in 2023. They really went into the money, and it really paid off for Rich Smith, the Democrat coming in.
Greg.
This is one of the things that I'm hearing. I think it'll be part of our follow-up coverage, which is just the flood of money on the local level. One of the conversations that there's been nationally for Democrats is that they have neglected the farm team, that they have not invested in local elections like the Republicans have. And so this election might have shown some of that flip. I'm hearing here in Old Lyme that the local Democrats might have gotten in excess of $65,000, which is a lot for a town of 8,000 people. And that's just the money we see. There's other conduits and outside money that certainly has an effect on these races.
Amy.
Nick, I also heard that his opponent was very young. Is that correct? 24 years old?
Oh, you're talking about Hamden? Yes.
Yeah, Hamden. I'm just curious.
With Jonathan Katz.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I'm wondering, what do you think? You think we're going to see him again?
Oh, I think we're definitely going to see him again. It's just a question of how hard this hit him. But when I saw him out on election day, he looked great. He was having a blast. Like every candidate you see, especially if they've been working hard, they look exhausted.
We will have to leave it there because we need to move on to Eric as we move further down towards the New York-Connecticut border. Eric Obenauer, our reporter, covered Stamford. Eric, any surprises there?
I wouldn't say really any surprises. Well, there was one surprise. Let me backtrack. I think overall the biggest surprise was just the depth of or the breadth, actually, of the Democrats' victory. I mean, Carolyn Simmons easily coasted to re-election, but she took just about every Democrat with her. It was a total rout. The Democrats took total control of the city's Board of Representatives as well.
For me, I guess when I look at that race, Eric, I think this idea of every Democrat, but one of the big stories here is that a lot of the incumbent Democrats weren't renominated, and we have a whole new crop of Democrats. And in fact, this is the election where Carolyn Simmons takes control of Stamford. I mean, she came in here as someone from Greenwich, and she and that's a little bit like the other side of the tracks. And so this is an election where the city council is truly, the Board of Reps is truly her own. Do you think that? Do you think there's something to that?
I agree. That's true, Greg. But I think this also goes back to something you alluded to earlier about basically the reassertion, if you will, of the importance of political organizations and machine politics. I mean, she had a massive machine at her behest, and there were some other candidates who made a lot of noise, which I admit I myself probably was a little bit gullible and falling for it. I'm just alluding to there were 3 write-in candidates who, not that I ever thought they would win, but I thought they would at least make more of a showing than they did. And in the end, I mean, they stood absolutely no chance. They would, you can't go up against a huge machine like that. It was a quixotic effort at best. There was one, if I can, there was one somewhat significant surprise. There was the Board of Education president, who's very close to Carolyn Simmons. That's Michael Hyman. He did not win back his seat. It was close, but I thought that was interesting.
And why do you think that is?
Well, there's issues. In the school, there's a number of issues in the school system, but especially the imposition of a new block scheduling format, which to outsiders, it sounds, your eyes want to glaze over when you hear that, but parents and students are very, very upset about it. And I suspect that with a new Board of Education now, some new members, it would not surprise me if as their first order of business, they undo that. And
frankly, one thing that's interesting is that in a town that has a large population of Latino voters, has quite a few black voters and residents, I think the board chair was the only black member of that Board of Education.
That's true. That is correct. But, in answer to your question, Ali, there was one other situation. It's a year ago, but if you'll remember, there was a girl, she was arrested. She was accused of assaulting a school assistant principal, and that was not the case. And I know that the assistant principal, I believe, was black herself, but I know the black community was very upset about that. And and I think that Michael Hyman, he's the board president, now outgoing board president, I think took some incoming because of that. One other thing, though, I mean, the smart money would say that Carolyn Simmons is in the catbird seat now. I'm sure she's immediately going to get consideration for higher office, but political coalitions can still be notoriously fickle. There's a lot of egos involved. And, also with respect to New Britain, there's been a lot of development of the downtown, but I think some folks feel the neighborhoods are being neglected.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, right. Eric, ever so many thanks. We need to move on, unfortunately, but thank you for that great reporting. You're listening to CT Examiner Weekly with analysis and reporting on the 2025 local elections. We'll be back after this short break.
There's something new on ICRV Radio. It's a story that we want to preserve and tell that just makes you think a little bit. So it's a vignette that makes you ruminate, or what we call a ruminette. Okay, so that's a made-up word, but these stories sure aren't. Here's an example. Former town historian and first selectman of Killingworth, Dave Levasseur, shares where we got the phrase, which I heard way too often as a youngster, mind your P's and Q's.
Because we were an English colony, we served beverages in pints and quarts, just as they do in England today. And so if you got a little too rambunctious, the bartender would tell you to mind your pints and quarts or mind your P's and Q's.
Now that's for sure something to chew on. Ruminettes, one more way ICRV Radio is making local matter.
Welcome back to CT Examiner Weekly and our analysis of the local elections. Amy Wu joins us now to talk about her election coverage of Groton, Mystic and Stonington races. Amy, welcome.
Thank you. So
let's start with Stonington and a new first selectman there.
Yeah, so there was a new first selectman, Bill Middleton. It's his first time running for this position. And what's interesting, I think, about this particular race is he was cross-endorsed by the Democrats and also by the Forward Party. So the previous first selectman, Danielle Cheeseborough, ran as a Forward Party candidate. And now we have Bill, who's pretty well known in the community in Mystic. He owns a bunch of restaurants, including the Jealous Monk, where the watch party was held. So it's a pretty interesting race.
Greg.
So, in this case, it looked like Bill Middleton, he really cleaned up. It was a pretty whopping win. But one of the questions I think we're seeing, and one of the questions I've heard is that as a developer, a notable developer in the town, is now taking over at a time that the town is wondering, what is our future? What is the future of development? Parking, restaurants, development. Is this a town for local residents? And at least the first answer to that question is the residents say, Bill Middleton, we're going with the developer.
So it is interesting. Absolutely. He is a developer. He's actually finishing up his hotel. He's renovating a vintage hotel all the way back from 1965. And he actually noted he's born in 1965 as well. In talking with him after Election Day, he said he's totally committed to this new position, meaning he says there's no new projects that he has. His project is going to be finished up in about by the end of the year, which is the hotel, which is the renovation. He says his restaurants are basically running themselves right now. He's going to be stepping down from the police board of commissioners, but he will stay on with Mystic Aquarium and also one other nonprofit. But he said that this is his jam now.
So you said there was a cross endorsement of Bill Middleton. Do you believe that there's sort of less polarization in politics when it comes to Stonington, or is Stonington kind of a different case?
Well, I think Stonington, so it has been unaffiliated. I mean, Danielle was unaffiliated and registered unaffiliated, and she was also with the Ford Party. She was also the chair. And Bill as well is unaffiliated and also cross-endorsed as well. So there seems to be a broader theme that there's very much a focus on just taking on these projects for the community and getting things done, and less so of which party is which. And he is a businessman, is the bottom line. And one thing that he has been running on is very much on his experience on business and finance and just saying, let me get things done.
I mean, one of the conversations, the other party, the Republicans, talking to the Republican candidate, one of the things he said to me was, look, for 25 years, I was a cop, and I couldn't get on the police commission in Stonington. And in fact, Bill Middleton was on that police commission, had never been in law enforcement. And I heard this voice that said, what about Pawcatuck? What about the sort of other side of the tracks? What about the people, these sort of quiet voices in town, these local voices, longtime local voices that maybe aren't the fancies? And so that's another conversation. It's certainly something we hear a lot from Pawcatuck is every time they have something that no one else wants, they put it in Pawcatuck.
I hung out in Pawcatuck at the polling station where Bill was. I talked to voters there as well. I think what was really interesting about Pawcatuck is that certainly there's their contingent, like what about our voices? But what was interesting about that day was they seemed to very much know about the two candidates running, and who they were. They referred to Middleton as the restaurateur who donates to the restaurants and so forth. So it seemed to be that there's definitely two sides to it, though, as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Let's quickly pick up on Groton as well, because Mayor Hedrick decided not to go for re-election. So they've got a new mayor after just over 8 years there.
Well, there is a new mayor there, Jill Rusk. What's interesting about Rusk's background is that she worked for Hedrick for 3 years full-time as a staff member, and also she does come from a background in city council and town council as well.
Jill obviously ultimately has prevailed, sort of thing, but a bit of a messy situation there.
I think as much as you see national politics coming down to the local level, in a lot of these towns, there's 169 towns in Connecticut. They're small, they're personal, and there's a lot of personal politics. And even in these towns that just have one party dominating, like Groton, we see the Democrats split into their own divisions, their own separate parties, the Groton Independents now, and fighting sometimes over control of this apparatus. And that's what we saw in Stonington, where one faction won. The Simmons faction beat out the Reform faction. Here in Groton, we see one faction beating out the other.
We're going to have to bring it to an end there, but Amy and Ali, ever so many thanks for that. As we round out this post-election special podcast, some final words from Greg. Obviously about the reporting, what happened. Just give us your final thoughts.
I think it's looking ahead. I think one of the big stories in the next 2 years will be development, and how this election, how this blue wave, how this does it empower Democrats? Does it feel like they have now the mandate to put in some of these changes on the statewide level and on the local level in terms of building housing, allowing development? And so far that's been kind of stymied. It's been kind of blocked. In fact, even the governor, Lamont, vetoed one of the biggest priorities on housing. And so we'll see what happens in the next couple months on that. And the other piece, I think, will be generationally whether or not young people will then be the next thing that sort of overturns this party dominance. Will they go along as they come into the fore, as the baby boom drops away? what's the future of the Republican and Democratic Party? And I don't know.
Any thoughts from any of the reporters on that? Because we started on that comment. Amy?
That is really interesting. Like in Groton for town council, the Republicans, the emergence of them for the first time, the three that were running were all in their late 70s and 80s. And even they jokingly said, gosh, we're aging out. And their big challenge is to recruit, is to cultivate next generation. And they're worried about that.
We're going to have to leave it there. All valid points to everyone who took part. Greg, Nick, Robert, Eric, Amy and Ali. Thank you as always. Don't forget you can read all the stories and our extensive election coverage you've heard today, and look at Robin's events calendar, even though she's not here today, on the digital pages of ctexaminer.com. And don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on all the week's news. This is CT Examiner Weekly, reporting and supporting what matters. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thanks for listening.